So, well, that's a fascinating subject, and I'm afraid I may just go on and on. So I'm just going to try to stop myself at a certain point. So first of all, the kimono that I showed were really very expensive kimono that were being promoted in a very deluxe magazine put out by Fujingaho, which is a sort of a high-level fashion magazine. So these were not necessarily accessible to the average Japanese woman at all. And in that sense, the fashion for sort of Mingei cho kimono was not new in the 1950s. It had begun a little bit in the 1930s and the early 1940s even. There were, I mean, Serizawa, for example, was designing kimono before 1945. But I think what was new in the 50s is that you really have the development of mass consumerism. And with it, the role of women as consumers becomes more and more important. Not necessarily for silk or cotton kimono dyed by famous artists, but for increasingly more goods and goods associated with, you know, it's not surprising, right? Dress, personal adornment, household goods, home decor. You know, these are the areas in which women around the world in industrializing societies have tended to become primary consumers, and that was certainly happening in Japan in the 1950s. And the part of my presentation I didn't get to had to do with the way in which a more sort of middle-class level of women consumers was beginning to be interested in Mingei household goods. And so there were a number of images I wanted to show you from a very sort of mass women's magazine called Shifunotono in the late 1950s, which promoted Mingei and Mingei-type objects for the home.
But were they high quality, or were they an acceptable mid-quality mass production?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think, again, there were class distinctions in what was available to people. I mean, I think for very elite women, it might have been possible to buy a hamada pot or a kawaii object, or perhaps something by another individual craftsperson. But mashiko pottery, or even just, you know, baskets, for example, were things that started to become more accessible. And then this is where we get into folk modernism, because I think there were, for example, Yanagi Sori, who was an industrial designer, began to design things that were inspired by Mingei to some degree, and that were being mass-produced and were not cheap necessarily, but were certainly more affordable and more popular as a result to, again, I think, a largely female market. So that it was a segmented market.
Thank you very much, Dr. Professor Menegazzo, you started your talk speaking about the sacred, which I found extremely interesting from a Western point of view, that the sacred, the relationship between crafts and artistic production, the sacred and nature are at the core of what happened before and what would happen later in the 20th century. You know the evolution between Mingei and contemporary design very well, and I think this is an absolutely fascinating topic, which I would like you to go maybe into a few more details and a few more minutes. So am I correct in assuming that contemporary Japanese high quality and higher standard design is, as it is today, thanks to the translation of the 50s of crucial elements of the 20s and 30s? Or did I get the passage wrong?
As I said yesterday, it's not a completed study, it's not a completed research, so it's everything on work. But what Professor Brent said now about the 50s regarding fashion can be translated also into design. Yanagi Sori was one of the key persons in this, in the design world, and can be translated into graphic design, because in the 55 we have also a big changing point in graphic design with the big Graphic 55 exhibition, where also the graphic design meaning changes from an idea of dessen, of Zuan, and we had another word, to the design word, English design word. So we have this shift also in the graphic design from a handmade design, dessen, which was the center point of the graphic design work, which was shown as an original handmade dessen, to a multiple made printed poster. So our contemporary idea of poster, of graphic design poster, is a product of these 50s. And so I think that these 50s is the most interesting period for Japan, because we have this trend watching at the tradition, and so all these publications about kimonos, but also other kind of traditional products and handcrafts, handmade product, but at the same time we have another kind of yes, a shift, a moment of great change in with the industrial product, to the industrial product, and the great big American influence of that period. So at the same time we can see another face of Japan, which is the American face, with women walking with American style dresses and glasses and hat and bags. And so this is the other part of the traditional kimono publications, but also, yes, dressing. And so in the design world, at the same time we have Yanagi Sori, for example, bringing these traditional handmade forms, materials, combined with the industrial new way of producing mass products in one product. And this is a very sensible and very fascinating, because if you think about the white porcelain teapot by Yanagi Sori with the handle in bamboo, but with this traditional material and forms, but with this white, which is very Western white, mashiro, and made in multiple, so it's a product for the mass. Here you have the change, which is a shift to the modern, to the contemporary form, the Japan that now we know as a contemporary design and graphic design, etc. But it brings behind all the knowledge, the technology, the sensibility about material and about forms from the past. And so what I said yesterday, which is it can be very criticized, the way that kami are inside contemporary design is an affirmation that can be criticized, I know, but I really feel this, because this is the big difference between the Western way of conducting life, of thinking things, of living with nature and creating a relation with things, which is not only these inanimated things but also all the living things. And this is very strictly linked, I think, to the kami, the yaoyorozu. So you have this entity in everything, which I think is the base of the Japanese way of thinking. So you cannot avoid to think about this as a base, very basic. So we cannot, we can also not say this, but we have this at the bottom of everything. Sorry, it's very confusing.
No, because I think that it's also, in the end effect, it's a different way of consumption. The way we consume in the West and in the East, these absolutely stunning design objects or ways of living, this kami, which in a way we feel in the West without being able to describe it, leads also, I imagine, that we couldn't have another symposium over this subject, to different kind of consumption.
Yes. And also we have a different way of using materials, of exploiting materials. If you look at contemporary designers, they continue to use their traditional materials such as washi, such as bamboo, wood, ceramics also, metal, at the same way we see in the works upstairs. But changing these materials and forms into a new use for contemporary life. But you feel the same sense of void, the same sense of balance between the material and the void part of the material. So this kind of balance making of objects relates strictly between contemporary product design and handmade crafts.